On March 15, 1961, demolition crews arrived at the abandoned St. Bartholomew's Catholic boarding school for boys in rural Clearfield County, Pennsylvania. What they discovered beneath the chapel floorboards would haunt investigators for decades and force authorities to confront one of the most systematic cases of institutional murder in American history. Between 1952 and 1960, 12 boys between the ages of 8 and 14 had simply vanished from the school's records, their disappearances explained away as runaways or family relocations. The truth was far more sinister. The skeletal remains found that cold March morning told a different story entirely. Forensic examination would later reveal evidence of prolonged torture, malnutrition, and deliberate medical experimentation. Each small skull bore distinctive markings that suggested the children had been subjected to crude surgical procedures while still alive. The Pennsylvania State Police immediately sealed the scene, but word of the discovery had already begun to spread through the tight-knit rural community that had once praised St. Bartholomew's as a beacon of moral education. Father Marcus Pemberton had arrived at St. Bartholomew's in the autumn of 1951, bringing with him impeccable credentials from the Archdiocese of Philadelphia and glowing recommendations from prominent Catholic families throughout the state. At 42 years old, he possessed the kind of commanding presence that inspired immediate trust and respect. His sister, Catherine Pemberton, had taken her vows as a nun 15 years earlier and served as the school's head matron, while their younger brother Thomas worked as the groundskeeper and maintenance supervisor. Together, the Pemberton family transformed St. Bartholomew's from a struggling rural institution into what appeared to be a model of Catholic education and discipline. The school had been established in 1897 to serve the children of Pennsylvania's growing immigrant population, particularly Irish and Polish families seeking better opportunities for their sons. By the time the Pembertons arrived, St. Bartholomew's housed nearly 60 boys ranging in age from 7 to 16, many of whom came from families too poor to afford traditional boarding school tuition. The institution survived on a combination of church funding, modest parental contributions, and the unpaid labor of its students, who maintained the grounds, prepared meals, and performed various manual tasks as part of their daily routine. Father Pemberton quickly established himself as a pillar of the local community, delivering passionate sermons at nearby parishes and organizing charitable drives that brought much-needed resources to struggling families throughout the region. His reputation for firm but fair discipline attracted parents who worried about the corrupting influences of modern society on their sons. They trusted him completely with their most precious possessions, believing that St. Bartholomew's would instill the moral character and religious devotion necessary for success in an increasingly secular world. Before we descend deeper into this horrific tale, I want you to know that this story isn't for everyone. Only those brave enough to confront the darkest chapters of Pennsylvania's hidden history should continue listening. If you're ready to join our community of true mystery seekers who refuse to let these crimes remain buried, hit that subscribe button right now and let us know in the comments what state you're listening from and what time it is where you are. We're building a global community of people who demand the truth, no matter how disturbing it might be. Sister Catherine Pemberton managed the day-to-day operations of the school with meticulous attention to detail, maintaining detailed records of each student's academic progress, behavioral incidents, and correspondence with family members. Her reputation for strictness was legendary among the boys, but parents appreciated her unwavering commitment to discipline and moral instruction. She conducted daily inspections of dormitories, supervised meal times with military precision, and personally reviewed all incoming and outgoing mail to ensure that students maintained appropriate contact with their families. Thomas Pemberton, though lacking his siblings' formal education and religious training, proved invaluable in maintaining the school's aging infrastructure and expansive grounds. His mechanical skills kept the heating system functional during brutal Pennsylvania winters, and his knowledge of construction allowed him to undertake various improvement projects without the expense of hiring outside contractors. The boys often saw him working alone in remote areas of the property, digging drainage ditches, repairing outbuildings, and maintaining the extensive network of underground tunnels that connected the main buildings to storage areas and utility systems. The first signs of trouble began appearing within months of the Pembertons' arrival, though few people recognized them as warning signs at the time. Parents started receiving fewer letters from their sons, and when correspondence did arrive, the handwriting often seemed stilted and unnatural. Several families complained that their boys sounded distant and frightened during the rare phone calls that were permitted, but these concerns were dismissed by school administrators who explained that homesickness and adjustment difficulties were normal parts of the boarding school experience. Local physicians began noticing an unusual pattern of injuries among St. Bartholomew's students who were brought to town for medical treatment. Burns, broken bones, and severe malnutrition were explained away as accidents or the natural consequences of rigorous physical education and outdoor work programs. Dr. Harold Morrison, who served as the school's consulting physician, later admitted that he had suspected abuse but feared challenging the authority of respected religious figures without concrete evidence. The isolation of St. Bartholomew's worked in the Pembertons' favor, as the school sat on nearly 300 acres of heavily forested land 15 miles from the nearest town. Visitors were discouraged except during carefully orchestrated special events, and the family maintained strict control over which students were allowed to interact with outsiders. Parents who arrived unexpectedly were told that their sons were participating in religious retreats or outdoor education programs that couldn't be interrupted. By the end of 1952, the foundation for what would become an 8-year reign of terror had been carefully laid. The Pemberton family's rise to prominence in Clearfield County had been carefully orchestrated over several generations. Marcus Pemberton's grandfather, Sean Pemberton, had immigrated from County Cork, Ireland, in 1878, bringing with him a fierce devotion to the Catholic faith and an unshakable belief in the power of religious authority to shape society. Sean worked as a coal miner for 15 years before accumulating enough savings to purchase a small general store in the town of Du Bois, where he established himself as a pillar of the Irish Catholic community. Sean's son, Patrick Pemberton, had shown early promise as a scholar and entered seminary at the age of 18. However, his ordination was delayed for 3 years due to what church records euphemistically described as difficulties with authority and an excessive interest in human anatomy. When Patrick finally became a priest in 1906, he was assigned to remote parishes where his unconventional methods and harsh disciplinary practices could be more easily overlooked by diocesan oversight. Marcus Pemberton inherited his father's intellectual gifts and his grandfather's business acumen, but he also possessed something far more dangerous, an intuitive understanding of how to manipulate people's deepest fears and desires. During his seminary years at St. Charles Borromeo in Philadelphia, he excelled at psychology and canon law while developing what his professors described as an unusual fascination with medieval church practices, particularly those related to penance and purification of the soul through physical suffering. Sister Catherine's path to religious life had been less voluntary than her family publicly acknowledged. At 17, she had been discovered in a compromising situation with a local merchant's son, and the threat of scandal had prompted her hasty entrance into the convent. Her natural intelligence and administrative skills quickly earned her positions of responsibility, but those who worked closely with her noted a cold ruthlessness beneath her pious exterior. She spoke frequently of the need to cleanse the world of impurity and saw discipline as the highest form of love. Thomas Pemberton had always been different from his siblings. While Marcus charmed audiences with his eloquence and Catherine commanded respect through her efficiency, Thomas remained in the shadows, watching and learning. His military service in World War II had exposed him to brutalities that would have traumatized most men, but Thomas had found the experience oddly educational. He returned home with specialized knowledge of human anatomy, interrogation techniques, and methods of disposing of evidence that would prove invaluable in the years to come. The community of Clearfield County welcomed the Pembertons with open arms, grateful for their commitment to providing quality education for local children. Father Marcus regularly preached at Our Lady of Sorrows Catholic Church in town, delivering powerful sermons about the corruption of modern society and the need for strong moral guidance in raising children. His message resonated deeply with parents who worried about the influence of television, popular music, and changing social attitudes on their sons. Local business leaders competed to invite Father Marcus to their social gatherings, where his combination of religious authority and worldly sophistication made him a sought-after guest. He cultivated relationships with the county sheriff, the district attorney, and several prominent judges, establishing a network of influential allies who would later prove crucial in protecting the family's activities. These men saw Father Marcus as a fellow guardian of traditional values in an increasingly permissive world. Sister Catherine's reputation extended beyond St. Bartholomew's walls through her involvement with various women's charitable organizations throughout the county. She organized clothing drives for needy families, coordinated meals for the sick and elderly, and served on the boards of several local orphanages. Her tireless work on behalf of vulnerable children only enhanced the family's standing in the community and provided perfect cover for their true activities. The transformation of St. Bartholomew's from a struggling institution into a model of Catholic education impressed diocesan officials who had previously considered closing the school due to financial difficulties. Father Marcus submitted detailed reports documenting improved academic performance, enhanced discipline, and increased enrollment, all of which painted a picture of remarkable institutional success. Bishop Coleman of the Altoona-Johnstown Diocese personally commended the Pembertons for their dedication during his annual visit in 1953. The transformation of St. Bartholomew's physical environment reflected the family's growing confidence and expanding ambitions. Father Marcus supervised extensive renovations during the summer of 1952, ostensibly to improve living conditions for students but actually to create the infrastructure necessary for their planned activities. New dormitory arrangements isolated vulnerable students from protective peer relationships, while modifications to the basement areas provided perfect cover for constructing specialized facilities. Local contractors who worked on the renovations later reported unusual requests for soundproofing materials, reinforced flooring, and specialized ventilation systems that seemed excessive for a simple boarding school. Thomas Pemberton's military engineering background enabled him to design modifications that appeared routine to casual observers while serving much darker purposes. The workers were carefully supervised to prevent them from observing sensitive areas or asking uncomfortable questions about the unusual specifications. The academic program at St. Bartholomew's became a carefully orchestrated deception designed to maintain the school's reputation while providing cover for identifying and isolating potential victims. Father Marcus introduced new psychological evaluation procedures that he claimed would help teachers better understand each student's individual needs and learning capabilities. These assessments actually served to identify boys whose family circumstances and personality traits made them suitable for exploitation. Sister Catherine's administrative efficiency extended to creating detailed files on every student's background, family financial situation, and psychological profile. Her correspondence with parents was carefully crafted to maintain trust while gradually reducing their contact with their sons. She explained policy changes regarding visitation, phone calls, and mail delivery as necessary measures to help boys develop independence and spiritual maturity away from worldly distractions. The Pemberton family's integration into local social networks provided them with early warning systems about potential investigations or suspicious activities. Father Marcus regularly attended community meetings where he could monitor local law enforcement discussions and identify any concerns about the school. His relationships with prominent citizens gave him advance notice of official visits or inquiries that might threaten their operation. Thomas Pemberton's role in maintaining the school's infrastructure gave him legitimate reasons to work alone in remote areas of the property, providing perfect cover for his construction activities and disposal operations. His reputation for mechanical competence and reliability made his explanations for various projects completely credible to anyone who observed his work. The extensive grounds provided numerous locations where suspicious activities could occur without attracting attention from casual observers. The religious authority that the family wielded proved to be their most powerful tool for controlling both victims and potential witnesses. Parents who might have questioned unusual policies or concerning reports from their children were reminded of their duty to trust God's representatives and support the spiritual education that would save their sons from worldly corruption. This religious manipulation made it extremely difficult for anyone to voice concerns without appearing to challenge divine authority. Local physicians who treated students from St. Bartholomew's began noticing patterns of injuries and health problems that seemed unusual for a well-run boarding school, but their concerns were dismissed through the family's careful cultivation of medical professionals who supported their explanations. Dr. Harold Morrison, who would later become suspicious of their activities, initially accepted their accounts of accidents and disciplinary measures as normal consequences of rigorous physical education programs. The financial improvements at St. Bartholomew's during the Pembertons' first year created positive impressions throughout the diocesan hierarchy and local community. The school's budget showed remarkable stability despite the challenging economic conditions that affected other religious institutions, leading to praise from church officials who saw the family as exceptionally capable administrators worthy of increased autonomy and reduced oversight. If you're feeling disturbed by how easily this family infiltrated and corrupted an entire community, you're not alone. Share this video with someone who appreciates true crime investigations, and don't forget to hit that like button to help us bring these forgotten stories to light. The more people who hear these accounts, the better we can understand how such horrors were allowed to continue for so long. The selection process began subtly in the spring of 1953, nearly 18 months after the Pembertons had established their reputation within the community. Father Marcus had developed what he called his assessment system, a methodical evaluation of each student's family circumstances, personality traits, and potential vulnerability. Boys from stable, well-connected families were treated with careful attention and genuine educational focus, while those from broken homes or families struggling with poverty became subjects of much darker interest. 8-year-old Timothy Walsh became the first victim, though his disappearance wouldn't be officially recognized for several more years. Timothy had arrived at St. Bartholomew's in September of 1952 after his mother died in a factory accident and his alcoholic father proved incapable of caring for him. The boy possessed the perfect combination of characteristics that the Pembertons sought: complete isolation from protective family members, above-average intelligence that made him interesting to study, and a naturally trusting disposition that made manipulation easier. Sister Catherine began Timothy's conditioning through what she described as special religious instruction. She isolated him from other students during evening prayer sessions, requiring him to remain in the chapel for additional penance while his classmates returned to their dormitories. During these private sessions, she gradually introduced concepts of suffering as spiritual purification, using carefully selected biblical passages to justify increasingly harsh physical disciplines. Timothy was told that his mother's death was punishment for his family's sins and that only through complete submission to God's representatives could he hope to achieve salvation. The basement levels of St. Bartholomew's main building contained a series of rooms that had originally served as storage areas and servants' quarters during the institution's early years. Thomas Pemberton spent months during the winter of 1952 converting these spaces into what the family privately called their research facilities. He installed soundproofing materials salvaged from a demolished theater in Pittsburgh, reinforced the walls with steel plates, and created a sophisticated ventilation system that would prevent odors from reaching the upper floors. Father Marcus approached his work with the methodical precision of a scientist conducting experiments. He maintained detailed journals documenting each subject's responses to various stimuli, recording physical measurements, psychological reactions, and what he termed spiritual developments. His background in psychology allowed him to design procedures that would break down a child's resistance while maintaining their usefulness for extended periods of study. The isolation techniques began with simple separation from peer groups during meals and recreational activities. Timothy would be told that his behavior required additional supervision, though no specific infractions were ever identified. This created a sense of guilt and confusion that made him more susceptible to the authority figures who claimed to be helping him improve. Sister Catherine would spend hours explaining how his struggles were evidence of spiritual weakness that required intensive correction. Medical experimentation formed a crucial component of the family's methodology. Father Marcus had maintained correspondence with several European physicians whose research during the war years had explored the limits of human endurance and pain tolerance. While he lacked formal medical training, his access to church medical supplies and his brother's practical knowledge of anatomy allowed him to conduct procedures that satisfied his scientific curiosity while serving their broader purposes. The disposal system that Thomas developed demonstrated remarkable sophistication for a small rural institution. The extensive tunnel network beneath the school connected to natural cave systems that extended deep into the surrounding limestone formations. Bodies could be transported from the basement research facilities to underground chambers where decomposition would occur naturally, with skeletal remains eventually becoming lost in the geological complexity of Pennsylvania's karst topography. Financial profit emerged as an unexpected benefit of their activities. Father Marcus discovered that certain wealthy individuals with unconventional interests were willing to pay substantial sums for access to their research subjects. A network of clients developed gradually, including physicians seeking to study pain responses, collectors interested in unusual anatomical specimens, and individuals whose appetites extended beyond what conventional society would tolerate. Record falsification required careful coordination among all three family members. Sister Catherine maintained official student files that documented fictional behavior problems, academic failures, and family communications that justified eventual removals from the school. She created correspondence from fictional relatives requesting transfers to other institutions, complete with forwarding addresses that led to abandoned properties or businesses that existed only on paper. Timothy Walsh's final weeks demonstrated the complete effectiveness of their conditioning process. By February of 1953, the boy had been completely broken psychologically, accepting the family's explanations for his suffering and actually expressing gratitude for their attention. He had been convinced that his pain served a holy purpose and that his sacrifice would help save other children from similar spiritual contamination. The success of their first complete case gave the Pembertons confidence to expand their operations. Father Marcus began identifying additional subjects among the school's population, looking for boys whose disappearances would attract minimal attention from families or authorities. The system they had developed during Timothy's processing could be refined and accelerated, allowing them to pursue their interests on a much larger scale while maintaining the perfect cover of their respected positions within the community. By the autumn of 1953, the Pembertons had refined their selection criteria into a precise science. They developed what Father Marcus termed the Vulnerability Index, a scoring system that rated potential subjects based on family stability, financial resources, academic performance, and psychological resilience. Boys who scored highest on this scale possessed the perfect combination of isolation and interesting characteristics that made them ideal for extended study. The second victim, 11-year-old Michael Kowalski, arrived at St. Bartholomew's in October after his father suffered a mining accident that left him permanently disabled. Michael's mother worked double shifts at a textile factory to support the family, leaving her little time to maintain regular contact with her son. The boy's Polish heritage and limited English skills further isolated him from both his classmates and the broader community, making him an ideal candidate for the family's attention. Sister Catherine had learned valuable lessons from Timothy Walsh's processing and applied these insights to accelerate Michael's conditioning. She discovered that children responded more quickly to psychological manipulation when physical deprivation was introduced gradually alongside spiritual indoctrination. Michael's meals were reduced systematically while Sister Catherine explained that fasting purified the soul and brought one closer to God's love. The basement facilities underwent significant expansion during the summer of 1953. Thomas Pemberton constructed additional soundproofed chambers and installed a more sophisticated drainage system that connected directly to the underground stream network. He also created a primitive but effective medical facility complete with surgical instruments acquired through Father Marcus's connections with hospital administrators throughout Pennsylvania. Father Marcus's research methodologies evolved to incorporate systematic documentation of each subject's complete physical and psychological profile. He photographed subjects at regular intervals, recorded detailed measurements of their responses to various stimuli, and maintained meticulous notes on their behavioral changes throughout the conditioning process. These records served both scientific and practical purposes, allowing him to refine his techniques while creating valuable documentation that certain clients were willing to purchase. The corruption of additional staff members became necessary as operations expanded beyond what 3 people could manage effectively. Father Marcus identified Brother Lawrence Hoffman, a young monk assigned to teach mathematics, as a potential recruit. Brother Lawrence had struggled with what church authorities euphemistically called difficulties with moral behavior, making him vulnerable to blackmail and manipulation. Father Marcus approached Brother Lawrence gradually, beginning with seemingly innocent requests to assist with special disciplinary cases that required additional supervision. He gradually exposed the younger man to increasingly disturbing activities while emphasizing the spiritual justification for their work and the absolute necessity of maintaining secrecy. Brother Lawrence's combination of desperation to avoid scandal and genuine fascination with their research made him a willing accomplice within months. The financial aspects of their operation expanded significantly during this period. Father Marcus established contact with Dr. Heinrich Brenner, a German physician who had relocated to Argentina after the war and maintained an extensive network of contacts interested in acquiring unusual research materials. Dr. Brenner's clients included collectors of anatomical specimens, researchers studying pain tolerance, and individuals whose interests extended into areas that conventional medicine wouldn't explore. Payment arrangements were sophisticated and carefully concealed through a series of shell companies and religious charitable organizations. Money flowed through accounts in Philadelphia, New York, and eventually overseas banks, with funds eventually returning to St. Bartholomew's through donations from fictional benefactors. The school's financial records showed steady improvement in funding, which impressed diocesan officials and provided perfect cover for their activities. Record falsification became increasingly elaborate as the number of missing students grew. Sister Catherine created entire fictional histories for boys who had been processed, including correspondence with imaginary relatives, transfer records to non-existent institutions, and even death certificates for subjects who had supposedly succumbed to illnesses while visiting family members. Her attention to detail was remarkable, with each false document containing period-appropriate details that would satisfy casual inspection. Michael Kowalski's processing demonstrated the efficiency improvements they had achieved since Timothy Walsh. The conditioning phase was completed in 8 weeks rather than 5 months, and the boy's complete psychological breakdown was accomplished through carefully calibrated combinations of sensory deprivation, religious indoctrination, and physical manipulation. Father Marcus documented every aspect of the process, creating a systematic approach that could be replicated with future subjects. The disposal methods evolved to accommodate increased volume while maintaining security. Thomas discovered that the limestone caves beneath the property connected to a much larger underground network that extended for miles through the surrounding countryside. Bodies could be transported through these passages to remote locations where they would never be discovered, even if extensive searches were conducted around the school grounds. By Christmas of 1953, the Pembertons had processed 3 subjects successfully and identified 6 additional candidates for future operations. Their confidence had grown enormously, and they began planning for a significant expansion of activities that would transform St. Bartholomew's into what Father Marcus privately called his laboratory for studying the limits of human endurance and spiritual purification. The year 1954 marked the beginning of what Father Marcus privately referred to as their golden period of research and expansion. The success of their refined methods had generated substantial financial resources while their reputation within the Catholic hierarchy continued to grow. Bishop Coleman recommended St. Bartholomew's as a model institution during the annual diocesan conference, praising the Pembertons for their innovative approaches to character development and moral education. Network expansion began with careful recruitment of sympathetic individuals at other Catholic institutions throughout Pennsylvania and neighboring states. Father Marcus identified priests, nuns, and lay administrators who showed signs of unconventional interests or whose personal circumstances made them vulnerable to compromise. His psychological training allowed him to recognize potential allies while avoiding those who might pose security risks to their operation. Brother Francis Donnelly at Sacred Heart Academy in Pittsburgh became their first external collaborator after Father Marcus discovered evidence of the man's inappropriate relationships with several students. Rather than expose Brother Francis, Father Marcus offered protection in exchange for assistance with their research projects. Sacred Heart Academy began experiencing its own pattern of mysterious disappearances, with Brother Francis carefully selecting subjects who met the Pemberton specifications. The subjects processed during 1954 demonstrated the terrifying efficiency their system had achieved. 9-year-old David Morrison arrived in March after his parents died in an automobile accident, leaving him completely without family connections. His conditioning was completed in just 6 weeks, with Father Marcus documenting remarkable psychological transformations that occurred when religious indoctrination was combined with carefully controlled medical procedures and sensory manipulation. Sister Catherine had perfected what she called spiritual preparation techniques that broke down a child's resistance while creating genuine gratitude toward their captors. She convinced subjects that their suffering served a divine purpose, that they had been specially chosen to help purify the world through their sacrifice. The boys actually began competing for her attention, desperately seeking approval from the woman who was systematically destroying their minds and bodies. Thomas Pemberton's mechanical skills enabled significant improvements to their underground facilities during this period. He installed electric lighting throughout the tunnel network, created storage areas for supplies and equipment, and constructed a sophisticated air filtration system that eliminated any trace of odors that might attract attention. The basement complex now resembled a professional medical facility rather than a makeshift laboratory. Dr. Heinrich Brenner arrived for his first personal visit to St. Bartholomew's in June of 1954, bringing with him advanced medical equipment and detailed specifications from his international clients. His expertise in experimental procedures elevated their research to levels that satisfied the most demanding customers while generating unprecedented profits. Dr. Brenner's presence also provided medical credibility that helped justify some of their more extreme activities. The financial network expanded to include accounts in Switzerland, Uruguay, and several Caribbean banks that specialized in maintaining client anonymity. Money moved through a complex series of transactions that made tracking virtually impossible, with funds eventually returning to support St. Bartholomew's operations through donations from wealthy benefactors who existed only on paper. The school's budget showed remarkable improvement, attracting positive attention from diocesan financial administrators. Client services evolved beyond simple specimen collection to include what Dr. Brenner termed observational opportunities for individuals with specialized interests. Wealthy patrons could arrange private visits to witness procedures firsthand, with fees reaching thousands of dollars for exclusive access to their most interesting subjects. These arrangements required elaborate security measures and careful scheduling to avoid detection by legitimate school activities. If this systematic expansion of evil is shocking you, imagine how the investigators felt when they finally uncovered the full scope of this network. Make sure you're subscribed to our channel because we're one of the few sources brave enough to document these buried histories. Hit that like button if you think stories like this need to be told, and share this video with anyone who can handle learning about humanity's darkest capabilities. Record keeping became increasingly sophisticated as operations expanded across multiple institutions. Sister Catherine maintained detailed databases tracking subjects at various locations, coordinating transportation between facilities, and managing the complex logistics of serving clients throughout the northeastern United States. Her organizational skills enabled the network to process subjects efficiently while maintaining the security necessary to avoid detection. Quality control measures were implemented to ensure consistent results across all participating institutions. Father Marcus developed standardized procedures that could be replicated by collaborators with varying levels of experience, complete with detailed manuals covering everything from initial subject selection to final disposal methods. Regular training sessions were conducted at remote locations where techniques could be refined and new methods shared among network members. The success of their expansion attracted attention from international contacts who operated similar networks in Europe and South America. Father Marcus established correspondence with organizations in Argentina, Spain, and several Eastern European countries where political instability provided excellent cover for their activities. These connections opened possibilities for even more ambitious projects that would dwarf their current operations. By the end of 1954, the network had processed 12 subjects successfully while establishing operational partnerships with 6 additional institutions. Their confidence had reached dangerous levels, and they began planning for activities that would transform their operation from a regional network into an international organization capable of serving the most demanding clients while generating enormous profits from their specialized research and services. The first serious threat to their operation emerged in October of 1954 when Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, a wealthy widow from Philadelphia, arrived unexpectedly at St. Bartholomew's demanding to see her nephew David Morrison. David had been processed 3 months earlier, but the family had maintained the fiction that he was thriving at the school while they gradually prepared a cover story for his eventual disappearance. Mrs. Patterson's sudden visit threatened to expose their entire operation. Sister Catherine met Mrs. Patterson at the front entrance and immediately implemented their emergency protocols. She explained that David was participating in a month-long religious retreat at a remote monastery in the Allegheny Mountains, a spiritual experience that required complete isolation from worldly contacts. Mrs. Patterson demanded documentation and threatened to contact diocesan authorities if she wasn't allowed to verify her nephew's welfare within 24 hours. Father Marcus arrived within minutes of being summoned and deployed the full force of his charismatic authority to manage the crisis. He spoke eloquently about David's remarkable spiritual development and his special calling to serve God through intensive prayer and meditation. Mrs. Patterson was initially skeptical, but Father Marcus's combination of religious authority and apparent sincerity gradually wore down her resistance. He promised that David would contact her personally within 2 weeks to confirm his well-being. The emergency required immediate action to create convincing evidence of David's continued existence. Thomas Pemberton was dispatched to Philadelphia with instructions to establish a temporary safe house where they could produce the necessary communications. Using forged documents and stolen clerical vestments, he created a fictional monastery complete with official letterhead and a telephone number that routed through an answering service they controlled. Brother Lawrence Hoffman was assigned to impersonate David during a carefully scripted telephone conversation with Mrs. Patterson. His naturally high voice and careful coaching enabled him to convince the worried aunt that her nephew was indeed alive and thriving in his religious studies. The call was kept brief to minimize the risk of detection, with Brother Lawrence explaining that extended conversations were forbidden during his period of spiritual purification. The close call prompted a comprehensive review of their security measures and the implementation of much stricter protocols for managing outside inquiries. Sister Catherine created detailed contingency plans for various types of unexpected visitors, complete with prepared explanations, forged documentation, and emergency communication procedures. Every staff member received intensive training on their roles during potential crisis situations. Witness elimination became a necessary consideration as their operation expanded and attracted increased attention from suspicious family members and local authorities. Father Marcus identified 3 individuals who posed potential threats to their security: Dr. Harold Morrison, who had treated several St. Bartholomew students and expressed concerns about their injuries; Mrs. Ruth Kelly, a local teacher who had questioned the high turnover rate among the school's students; and Deputy Sheriff James Crawford, who had begun asking pointed questions about the school's isolation policies. Dr. Morrison's elimination was accomplished through what appeared to be a tragic automobile accident on a remote mountain road during a severe snowstorm in December of 1954. Thomas Pemberton's military training proved invaluable in sabotaging the physician's vehicle in a way that would appear accidental even under careful investigation. The doctor's death was mourned throughout the community, and his concerns about St. Bartholomew's died with him. Mrs. Kelly received a more subtle treatment that destroyed her credibility rather than her life. Father Marcus arranged for evidence of mental instability to be discovered among her personal effects, including journals that suggested she was suffering from paranoid delusions about widespread conspiracies involving local religious institutions. Her accusations against St. Bartholomew's were dismissed as symptoms of her deteriorating psychological condition, and she was quietly committed to a state mental hospital where her complaints would be ignored. Deputy Sheriff Crawford posed the most serious threat due to his law enforcement authority and his persistence in investigating discrepancies in the school's records. Father Marcus arranged a meeting where he provided Crawford with detailed explanations for every concern the deputy had raised, supported by carefully forged documentation and testimony from corrupt officials within their network. Crawford was also offered substantial financial incentives to focus his investigative efforts on other matters that posed no threat to their operation. Authority figure corruption expanded significantly during this period as the Pembertons recognized the vital importance of having law enforcement and legal officials under their control. County Sheriff William Thompson was compromised through photographs that documented his relationship with an underage girl, making him completely dependent on their discretion for his continued freedom and career. District Attorney Robert Hayes was recruited through a combination of financial bribes and evidence of his embezzlement from county funds. Evidence destruction protocols were refined to ensure that no trace of their activities could survive intensive investigation. All equipment and supplies were thoroughly cleaned after each use, with any potentially incriminating materials transported to remote disposal sites where they would never be discovered. The basement facilities were designed with removable components that could be quickly dismantled and relocated if emergency evacuation became necessary. Communication security measures included the development of coded language for telephone conversations and written correspondence, ensuring that even intercepted messages would appear innocuous to outside observers. Father Marcus created an elaborate system of biblical references and religious terminology that allowed detailed discussions of their activities while maintaining the appearance of routine ecclesiastical communications. By early 1955, their security network had eliminated all immediate threats while establishing protective relationships with key authority figures throughout the region. The Pembertons felt confident that their operation could continue indefinitely without fear of detection or prosecution, unaware that their growing arrogance and expanded activities were already attracting attention from investigators beyond their sphere of influence. The spring of 1955 brought unexpected challenges that would begin the slow unraveling of the Pembertons' carefully constructed empire. Parents throughout Pennsylvania had begun comparing notes during church gatherings and community events, discovering disturbing patterns in their sons' communications from St. Bartholomew's. Letters arrived with increasingly uniform handwriting and identical phrasing, while phone calls became rare and stilted when they occurred at all. Margaret Sullivan, whose son Patrick had been at St. Bartholomew's for 18 months, organized an informal meeting of concerned parents at her home in Altoona. 12 families attended, each bringing letters and documentation that revealed troubling inconsistencies in the school's reporting. Several parents noted that their sons had stopped mentioning specific friends or activities, instead writing only about prayer, study, and discipline in language that seemed far too mature for children their age. The parents decided to coordinate an unannounced group visit to St. Bartholomew's, believing that their collective presence would make it impossible for school administrators to dismiss their concerns or restrict their access to their children. They planned to arrive on Saturday morning when students would typically be engaged in recreational activities, making it natural for parents to interact with their sons informally. Sister Catherine detected the approaching crisis through her network of informants in surrounding communities. A loyal parishioner at Our Lady of Sorrows had overheard discussions about the planned visit and immediately reported the information to Father Marcus. The Pembertons had less than 48 hours to prepare for what could become the most serious threat their operation had ever faced. Emergency protocols were implemented immediately to create the appearance of normal school operations. The remaining legitimate students were briefed extensively on appropriate responses to parental inquiries, with careful scripts prepared to explain the absence of boys who had already been processed. Brother Lawrence and newly recruited staff members were assigned to portray missing students from a distance, using similar clothing and careful positioning to create convincing impressions for worried parents. The Saturday visit proceeded exactly as the parents had planned, with 12 families arriving simultaneously and demanding immediate access to their sons. Father Marcus greeted them with characteristic warmth and apparent delight at their unexpected arrival, explaining that most students were participating in outdoor activities throughout the extensive school grounds. He organized guided tours that carefully avoided sensitive areas while providing numerous opportunities for parents to observe their children. Several parents remained suspicious despite the elaborate charade. Mrs. Sullivan noticed that her son Patrick seemed unusually subdued and spoke in the same stilted phrases that had appeared in his recent letters. When she tried to speak with him privately, Sister Catherine intervened with explanations about scheduled activities that couldn't be interrupted. Other parents reported similar difficulties in having meaningful conversations with their children. Mr. Joseph Kowalski, Michael's father, proved particularly problematic because his son had been processed nearly 18 months earlier. The boy portrayed as Michael was actually a younger student who had been coached extensively, but Mr. Kowalski noticed subtle differences in appearance and behavior that aroused his suspicions. He demanded to see his son's dormitory room and personal belongings, creating additional complications for the deception. The crisis deepened when Mrs. Helen Morrison asked to speak with the school physician about her son David's recurring headaches, unaware that David had been processed and Dr. Morrison had been eliminated months earlier. Father Marcus was forced to explain that Dr. Morrison had tragically died in an automobile accident and that medical care was now provided by a visiting physician from Pittsburgh who only came to the school twice monthly. Several parents left St. Bartholomew's that day with serious doubts about their son's welfare, despite the elaborate efforts to reassure them. They agreed to maintain regular contact with each other and to coordinate any future concerns about the school's operations. Mrs. Sullivan suggested that they should also contact diocesan authorities if their worries continued to grow. The investigation that worried the Pembertons most began developing completely outside their awareness. Father Thomas Ryan, a young priest recently assigned to the diocesan office in Altoona, had been tasked with reviewing financial records for all Catholic institutions in the region. His examination of St. Bartholomew's books revealed discrepancies that suggested either serious mismanagement or deliberate fraud. Father Ryan noticed that the school's reported enrollment numbers didn't match the tuition payments recorded in diocesan financial records. Several students appeared to be paying tuition despite supposedly transferring to other institutions, while other boys had stopped generating income without any official record of their departure. The pattern suggested systematic manipulation of financial documentation that warranted closer investigation. If these mounting suspicions and coordinated parent concerns are making you nervous for what's coming next, you're right to feel that way. The walls were closing in on this family of monsters, but they still had resources and allies that would make their final exposure far more difficult than anyone imagined. Make sure you're subscribed because this story takes some incredible turns that you won't want to miss, and hit that like button if you're appreciating how we're uncovering these buried crimes that powerful people wanted to keep hidden forever. Brother Lawrence Hoffman had begun showing signs of psychological strain that threatened operational security. His participation in the network's activities had gradually destroyed his mental stability, and he was making increasingly careless statements during conversations with other staff members. Father Marcus recognized that Brother Lawrence was becoming a liability who might expose their activities through his deteriorating behavior. The Pembertons convened emergency meetings throughout the week following the parental visit to assess the damage and plan their responses to mounting scrutiny. They realized that their operation had grown beyond the point where simple explanations and authority intimidation could address serious investigations. More drastic measures would be necessary to preserve their freedom and continue their activities. Local law enforcement remained compromised through their corruption network, but diocesan investigators and concerned parents represented threats that couldn't be easily neutralized through their existing methods. The family began developing contingency plans that included the possibility of abandoning St. Bartholomew's entirely and relocating their operation to more secure facilities in other states or countries. The breakthrough that would ultimately destroy the Pembertons came from an unexpected source in late summer of 1955. 13-year-old Robert Chen had arrived at St. Bartholomew's in April after his missionary parents died in a typhoid outbreak in China, leaving him without any family connections in the United States. His Asian heritage and limited English made him an ideal target for the family selection process, but Robert possessed survival instincts that had been honed by years of living in dangerous conditions overseas. Robert had observed the disappearances of other boys and recognized patterns that the Pembertons assumed were invisible to children. He noticed which students received special attention from Sister Catherine, documented the timing of their disappearances, and mapped the underground passages that he discovered during his careful exploration of the school's basement areas. Most importantly, he maintained detailed records hidden in a location that would survive even if he didn't. The boys' opportunity for escape came during a severe thunderstorm in August when the electrical systems failed and Thomas Pemberton was distracted by emergency repairs throughout the building. Robert had been selected for processing and was being held in one of the basement chambers when the power outage created temporary confusion among his captors. He managed to slip away through the tunnel system and make his way to the surface through an exit he had discovered weeks earlier. Robert's first challenge was finding adults who would believe his incredible story about the respected Pemberton family. His broken English and traumatic condition made him appear unreliable to most authorities, and his accusations against prominent religious figures seemed impossible to credit. Several officials he approached dismissed his claims as the fantasies of a disturbed orphan who was struggling to adjust to life in America. Father Thomas Ryan proved to be the crucial exception. The young diocesan investigator was already suspicious about St. Bartholomew's financial irregularities when Robert appeared at his office with detailed knowledge about the school's hidden areas and missing students. Father Ryan's training in seminary had included extensive instruction about recognizing signs of abuse, and Robert's specific details convinced him that immediate action was necessary. The evidence that Robert provided included hand-drawn maps of the basement facility, a list of boys who had disappeared with approximate dates, and most damning of all, physical proof in the form of personal items he had retrieved from the underground chambers. Among these items were Timothy Walsh's distinctive wooden cross necklace and Michael Kowalski's immigration documents, both of which could be verified through family records. Father Ryan faced a delicate situation that required careful handling to avoid alerting the Pembertons while building a case strong enough to overcome their powerful connections within the church hierarchy. He contacted FBI Special Agent William Morrison, a devout Catholic whose brother had been the physician eliminated by the Pembertons, though this connection remained unknown at the time. Agent Morrison brought federal resources and investigative expertise that local authorities lacked, along with personal motivation to pursue any irregularities involving Catholic institutions. His initial assessment of Robert's claims revealed disturbing correlations with missing persons reports from throughout the region, suggesting that St. Bartholomew's might be connected to a much larger pattern of disappearances. The investigation began with careful surveillance of the school while agents worked to verify Robert's information through independent sources. Financial records were subpoenaed from banks throughout Pennsylvania and neighboring states, revealing the complex network of accounts and transactions that had funded the Pembertons' operation. International banking connections raised additional flags that attracted attention from Treasury investigators. Documentation emerged slowly as investigators traced the paper trails that the Pembertons had assumed were completely concealed. Shell companies, fraudulent charities, and overseas banking relationships painted a picture of systematic financial crime that existed alongside whatever was happening to the missing children. Each discovery provided additional justification for expanding the investigation's scope and resources. The Pembertons remained unaware of the federal investigation during its early stages, but they recognized that Robert's escape represented a catastrophic security breach that threatened their entire operation. Sister Catherine organized systematic searches of the surrounding countryside while Father Marcus used his authority network to monitor law enforcement communications for any indication that their activities had been exposed. Brother Lawrence's psychological deterioration accelerated dramatically after Robert's escape, as he realized that their crimes would inevitably be discovered and prosecuted. His increasingly erratic behavior included making veiled confessions during religious services and approaching other staff members with disturbing questions about moral responsibility for participating in evil activities. Father Marcus recognized that Brother Lawrence had become an immediate threat to operational security. The elimination of Brother Lawrence was accomplished through what appeared to be a suicide by hanging in his dormitory room, complete with a carefully composed note expressing guilt over unnamed sins and inability to continue living with his shame. The supposed suicide was investigated by corrupt local authorities who accepted the staged evidence without serious scrutiny, but federal investigators would later recognize it as another murder designed to silence a potential witness. Thomas Pemberton began implementing emergency protocols for destroying evidence and preparing potential escape routes as the family realized that their operation faced unprecedented threats. Equipment was removed from the basement facilities and transported to remote locations where it could be destroyed safely, while incriminating documents were burned in furnaces throughout the school building. The autumn of 1955 brought increasing pressure from multiple investigative sources while the Pembertons struggled to maintain the appearance of normal operations at St. Bartholomew's. They recognized that their window for escape was closing rapidly, but their arrogance and attachment to their profitable enterprise prevented them from taking decisive action while they still possessed the resources and connections necessary for successful flight. The confrontation that would seal the Pembertons' fate began on October 3, 1955, when FBI agents arrived at St. Bartholomew's with federal search warrants that bypassed the corrupted local authority network entirely. Agent Morrison had coordinated with state police investigators to ensure that Sheriff Thompson and District Attorney Hayes were excluded from the operation, preventing them from warning their criminal associates about the impending raid. Father Marcus attempted to assert his religious authority and demand that any investigation be conducted through proper diocesan channels, but Agent Morrison presented federal warrants that superseded local jurisdictional protections. The scope of the search included all buildings, grounds, and underground areas, based on specific information provided by Robert Chen and corroborated through independent investigation. The discovery of the basement facilities exceeded even the investigators' worst expectations. Despite the Pembertons' frantic efforts to destroy evidence, the sophisticated chambers revealed clear signs of their horrific purpose. Bloodstains that had penetrated concrete floors, surgical equipment hidden in sealed containers, and ventilation systems designed to contain screams provided undeniable proof of systematic torture and murder. Sister Catherine's meticulous record-keeping proved to be the family's ultimate downfall. Hidden compartments throughout her office contained detailed documentation of their activities, including photographs of victims, financial transactions with international clients, and correspondence with collaborators at other institutions. Her compulsive need to document their work had created an archive that would provide prosecutors with overwhelming evidence of their crimes. The underground tunnel system yielded additional horrors as investigators followed Robert's maps to remote chambers where remains had been disposed of over nearly 4 years of operation. Forensic teams recovered skeletal fragments from 11 children, along with personal items that could be traced to specific missing persons reports. The limestone caves had preserved enough evidence to establish both the scope of the crimes and the systematic nature of the killings. Thomas Pemberton attempted to escape through the tunnel network when he realized that the investigation would uncover everything, but federal agents had already positioned teams at all known exits based on Robert's detailed intelligence. His capture in the underground passages provided dramatic evidence of the family's guilt, as no innocent person would flee through secret tunnels to avoid questioning by law enforcement. The attempted cover-up operations that followed the initial arrests demonstrated the extensive network of corruption that the Pembertons had cultivated throughout their years of operation. Sheriff Thompson tried to interfere with evidence collection until he was arrested for obstruction of justice, while District Attorney Hayes attempted to claim prosecutorial jurisdiction to control the case until federal authorities threatened him with conspiracy charges. Dr. Heinrich Brenner's involvement became clear when investigators discovered correspondence detailing his visits to St. Bartholomew's and his role in training other network members in advanced procedures. International warrants were issued for his arrest, but he had already fled Argentina for Paraguay, where sympathetic officials provided protection that would keep him beyond the reach of American justice for decades. The broader network began unraveling rapidly as investigators followed financial trails and communication records to identify collaborators at other institutions. Brother Francis Donnelly at Sacred Heart Academy was arrested after searches revealed similar basement facilities and evidence of missing students. Within weeks, a dozen priests and nuns throughout the northeastern United States faced charges related to their participation in what prosecutors described as an unprecedented conspiracy. Financial investigations revealed the staggering scope of the criminal enterprise that had funded operations at multiple locations. Bank records from Switzerland, Uruguay, and the Caribbean documented millions of dollars in transactions related to the sale of victims, research materials, and observational services to wealthy clients throughout the world. The money trail implicated prominent individuals whose names were carefully protected during the legal proceedings. Father Marcus maintained his innocence even after overwhelming evidence was presented, claiming that he was the victim of a conspiracy designed to destroy the Catholic Church's influence in American society. His charismatic personality and religious authority initially attracted supporters who refused to believe that such respected figures could commit such horrific crimes, but public opinion shifted decisively as more evidence became public. The discovery of client records revealed the existence of an international market for the services provided by the Pemberton network. Wealthy individuals from the United States, Europe, and South America had paid substantial sums for access to victims, research materials, and documentation of procedures. These revelations attracted international attention and prompted investigations in multiple countries. Sister Catherine's psychological evaluation revealed a complex personality that combined genuine religious devotion with complete moral detachment regarding her victims. She expressed no remorse for the children who had died, instead maintaining that their suffering had served important spiritual and scientific purposes. Her clinical descriptions of torture and murder shocked even experienced prosecutors who had handled numerous violent crime cases. Local community members struggled to reconcile their positive memories of the Pembertons with the overwhelming evidence of their crimes. Many residents had trusted these religious figures with their most precious possessions and felt profound guilt about their failure to recognize the signs of abuse that had been occurring literally beneath their notice. The betrayal of trust would haunt Clearfield County for generations. The media attention surrounding the case brought national focus to the issue of institutional abuse and the potential for corruption within religious organizations. Congressional hearings were scheduled to examine oversight failures that had allowed such systematic crimes to continue undetected for years, while Catholic Church officials faced unprecedented scrutiny regarding their screening and supervision of clergy members. By November of 1955, the full scope of the Pemberton family's crimes had been documented through extensive investigation, but the legal proceedings were only beginning. The complexity of the case, the international connections, and the involvement of prominent individuals would require years of careful prosecution to achieve justice for the 12 children whose lives had been stolen in the name of twisted research and financial profit. The trial of the Pemberton family began in March of 1956 and immediately became one of the most closely watched criminal proceedings in American history. Federal prosecutors had assembled what they described as the most comprehensive case of institutional murder ever documented, with evidence spanning for years of systematic crimes against children. The courtroom was packed daily with journalists, legal observers, and family members seeking justice for their lost sons. Robert Chen's testimony provided the foundation for the prosecution's case, as his detailed knowledge of the basement facilities and victim identification proved impossible for defense attorneys to discredit. His calm recitation of horrors he had witnessed demonstrated remarkable courage for a 13-year-old boy who had survived experiences that would have destroyed most adults. The jury listened in stunned silence as he described the systematic processing of children and the elaborate disposal methods used to conceal evidence. The physical evidence presented during the trial shocked even seasoned court observers who had followed violent crime cases throughout their careers. Photographs of the basement facilities revealed sophisticated torture chambers that had been designed and constructed over months of careful planning. Medical equipment, restraining devices, and documentation systems demonstrated the calculated nature of crimes that prosecutors argued represented unprecedented evil in American criminal history. Sister Catherine's own records provided the most damning evidence against the family, as her compulsive documentation had created an archive that detailed every aspect of their operation. Her journals contained clinical descriptions of procedures performed on victims, financial calculations regarding profit margins from various clients, and strategic planning for expanding operations to additional institutions throughout the region and beyond. Expert testimony from forensic pathologists revealed the extent of suffering endured by the 12 confirmed victims, though prosecutors noted that the true number was likely much higher due to evidence destruction and the international scope of the network. Medical examiners described injuries that could only have been inflicted deliberately over extended periods, demonstrating systematic torture that served both experimental and sadistic purposes. Financial investigators testified about the complex international banking network that had generated millions of dollars in profits from the sale of victims, research materials, and observational services to wealthy clients worldwide. Treasury agents had traced transactions through multiple countries and documented a sophisticated money laundering operation that rivaled those used by major organized crime syndicates. Defense attorneys struggled to present any credible alternative theory for the overwhelming evidence, instead focusing on procedural challenges and claims that their clients had been framed by conspirators seeking to destroy the Catholic Church's reputation. Their arguments gained little traction with jurors who had seen photographic evidence of the crimes and heard detailed testimony from survivors and investigators. The revelation of client identities created international diplomatic complications as prosecutors revealed that prominent individuals from multiple countries had participated in or funded the Pemberton network's activities. Several foreign governments requested that specific names be withheld from public disclosure to prevent damage to ongoing investigations in their own jurisdictions. Public reaction to the trial testimony included widespread protests outside the courthouse and demands for comprehensive reforms of religious institutions throughout the United States. Catholic Church officials faced unprecedented scrutiny regarding their oversight procedures and their handling of previous abuse allegations that had been dismissed or covered up rather than properly investigated. If you're struggling to comprehend how such systematic evil could continue undetected for years, you're not alone in that horror. This case changed how America viewed institutional authority forever, and the ripple effects continue to this day. Make sure you stay subscribed to see how this unprecedented trial concluded, and share this video with anyone who needs to understand how powerful people can hide their crimes until brave survivors like Robert Chen find the courage to speak truth to power. Father Marcus attempted to maintain his dignity and religious authority even while facing life imprisonment, delivering speeches from the witness stand about the spiritual significance of suffering and the misunderstanding of divine purposes by secular authorities. His grandiose statements only reinforced the prosecution's portrayal of him as a megalomaniac who had used religious authority to justify unspeakable crimes against innocent children. The international investigation expanded during the trial as evidence revealed connections to similar networks operating in Europe, South America, and Asia. Interpol coordinated with American authorities to identify and apprehend collaborators who had fled to countries without extradition treaties, though many suspects remained beyond the reach of justice due to political protection and diplomatic immunity. Thomas Pemberton's military background and technical expertise had enabled much of the network's operational success, and his testimony about disposal methods and facility construction provided crucial details for investigators seeking to locate additional evidence. His cooperation with prosecutors was motivated primarily by fear of the death penalty rather than genuine remorse for his participation in the crimes. Victim impact statements from surviving family members provided emotional testimony that helped jurors understand the human cost of the Pembertons' activities. Parents described the anguish of years spent wondering about their sons' fates, while siblings spoke about growing up in families destroyed by grief and uncertainty. The community impact extended far beyond the immediate victims to encompass everyone who had trusted these religious figures with their children's welfare. The defense team's final arguments focused on the unprecedented nature of the charges and the difficulty of comprehending crimes so far beyond normal human experience. They argued that the severity of the accusations made fair judgment impossible and that the media attention had created an atmosphere where acquittal was politically unacceptable regardless of legal standards. Jury deliberations lasted only 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges against all 3 defendants. The speed of the decision reflected the overwhelming nature of the evidence and the jurors' unanimous conclusion that the Pemberton family had committed crimes that demanded the maximum penalties available under federal law. Sentencing hearings were scheduled for the following month, with prosecutors seeking death penalties for all 3 defendants. The sentencing phase of the Pemberton trial in April 1956 brought unprecedented attention to questions of justice and institutional accountability that would reshape American legal precedents for decades. Federal Judge Harold Morrison, whose own brother had been murdered by the defendants, recused himself from sentencing decisions to avoid any appearance of personal bias, though his replacement, Judge Margaret Sullivan, proved equally committed to ensuring that justice reflected the magnitude of the crimes. Father Marcus Pemberton received 3 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole, avoiding the death penalty only because of procedural complications related to federal jurisdiction over crimes committed on church property. His final statement to the court included no acknowledgement of guilt or expression of remorse, instead consisting of rambling theological justifications for his actions and predictions that history would vindicate his research as advancing human understanding of spiritual purification through suffering. Sister Catherine Pemberton was sentenced to life imprisonment after psychological evaluations revealed that her mental state made her ineligible for capital punishment under federal guidelines. Her complete lack of emotional response to victim impact statements demonstrated a level of psychological detachment that experts described as unprecedented in American criminal history. She continued maintaining detailed journals throughout her incarceration, documenting her observations of prison life with the same clinical precision she had applied to documenting torture. Thomas Pemberton received the death penalty after prosecutors successfully argued that his military training and technical expertise had been essential to the systematic nature of the crimes. His execution by electric chair in 1958 marked the end of the family's direct involvement in criminal activities, though investigations would continue for years to identify and prosecute their collaborators throughout the international network they had established. The broader network prosecution required coordination between multiple federal agencies and international law enforcement organizations that had never attempted such extensive cooperation. Brother Francis Donnelly at Sacred Heart Academy received 2 consecutive life sentences after evidence revealed that his facility had processed at least 8 additional victims using methods identical to those developed at St. Bartholomew's. His cooperation with investigators led to the identification of additional collaborators in Pennsylvania, New York, and New Jersey. Sheriff William Thompson and District Attorney Robert Hayes were convicted of conspiracy and obstruction of justice, receiving 15-year sentences that effectively ended their careers and destroyed their reputations within the law enforcement community. Their trials revealed the extent to which corruption had penetrated local government, prompting comprehensive reforms of oversight procedures and accountability measures throughout Pennsylvania's rural counties. Dr. Heinrich Brenner remained beyond the reach of American justice despite extensive diplomatic efforts to secure his extradition from Paraguay. Intelligence agencies monitored his activities for years, documenting his continued involvement with similar networks in South America while building cases that would eventually lead to his prosecution by international tribunals. His escape served as a reminder that some participants in the conspiracy would never face full accountability for their crimes. The financial investigation expanded to encompass banking institutions that had facilitated money laundering operations, resulting in unprecedented penalties against Swiss and Caribbean banks that had knowingly processed transactions related to human trafficking and murder. Congressional hearings examined regulatory failures that had allowed such extensive criminal financing to operate without detection, leading to comprehensive reforms of international banking oversight. Catholic Church officials faced intense scrutiny regarding their institutional failures that had enabled such systematic abuse to continue undetected for years. Cardinal Joseph Murphy of Philadelphia was forced to resign after evidence revealed that he had received multiple reports about irregularities at St. Bartholomew's but had failed to investigate or report them to civil authorities. His replacement implemented new oversight procedures that required mandatory reporting of abuse allegations to law enforcement agencies. The Vatican issued unprecedented statements acknowledging institutional failures and announcing comprehensive reforms designed to prevent similar crimes in the future. Pope Pius XII personally met with survivors and victims' families, though many participants found the Church's response inadequate given the systematic nature of the failures that had enabled the Pemberton network to operate with impunity for so long. Congressional investigations revealed that federal agencies had received reports about suspicious activities at religious institutions but had failed to coordinate investigations or share information effectively. The creation of specialized task forces focused on institutional abuse resulted from recommendations made by committees that examined the case, establishing permanent mechanisms for detecting and prosecuting similar crimes in the future. International cooperation expanded significantly as evidence revealed similar networks operating in multiple countries with connections to the Pemberton operation. Investigators in Argentina, Spain, and several Eastern European nations discovered facilities that used identical methods and served overlapping client bases, suggesting that the American network was part of a much larger international conspiracy that had been operating for decades. The legal precedents established during the Pemberton prosecutions influenced criminal law throughout the United States, particularly regarding institutional liability, conspiracy charges, and international cooperation in complex criminal cases. Law schools began teaching courses specifically focused on the case, using it as an example of how systematic evil could flourish within respected institutions when oversight mechanisms failed to function properly. Academic research examining the psychological aspects of the case provided insights into how seemingly normal individuals could become participants in systematic torture and murder when surrounded by institutional authority and financial incentives. The Pemberton case became a standard reference point for studies of organizational deviance, moral disengagement, and the corruption of religious authority for criminal purposes. Media coverage of the trials and their aftermath sparked national conversations about institutional accountability, child protection, and the potential for abuse within organizations that claimed moral authority. The case influenced public policy regarding mandatory reporting requirements, background check procedures, and oversight mechanisms for institutions serving vulnerable populations throughout American society. By 1959, the immediate legal proceedings had concluded, but the broader implications of the Pemberton network continued reverberating throughout American society and international law enforcement. The 12 confirmed victims had received justice through the criminal convictions, but the full scope of their crimes and the identity of all participants would remain subjects of investigation and speculation for decades to come. The ruins of St. Bartholomew's Catholic boarding school still stand today in the forests of Clearfield County, Pennsylvania, serving as a stark reminder of how institutional authority can be corrupted to serve the darkest human impulses. The buildings were abandoned immediately after the trials concluded, and despite numerous proposals for demolition or renovation, the property remains untouched nearly 70 years later. Local residents report that the site continues to attract investigators, historians, and those seeking to understand how such systematic evil could flourish in plain sight. Robert Chen's courage in exposing the Pemberton network saved countless lives and fundamentally changed how American society approaches institutional oversight and child protection. He survived his traumatic experiences to become a respected physician specializing in trauma recovery, dedicating his career to helping other survivors of systematic abuse. His memoir, published in 1978, provided additional details about the psychological manipulation techniques used by the Pembertons and offered insights that influenced therapeutic approaches for treating survivors of institutional abuse. The memorial, established in 1961, honors the 12 confirmed victims whose names were finally known: Timothy Walsh, Michael Kowalski, David Morrison, Patrick Sullivan, James Crawford, William Thompson, Dennis Murphy, Stephen Kelly, Christopher Ryan, Anthony Donnelly, Francis Coleman, and Robert Patterson. Their families worked together to create a permanent remembrance that acknowledges their suffering while celebrating their young lives that were stolen by those who claim to serve God and protect children. The broader impact of the Pemberton case extended far beyond criminal justice to influence social policy, religious reform, and international law enforcement cooperation for generations. The mandatory reporting requirements implemented in response to the case became models for legislation throughout the United States and influenced similar laws in countries worldwide. Child protection agencies developed new screening procedures and oversight mechanisms specifically designed to prevent institutional abuse from continuing undetected. Sister Catherine Pemberton died in federal prison in 1973, maintaining her detailed journals until the end and never expressing remorse for her participation in the network's crimes. Her final writings revealed additional information about international connections and procedures that investigators had never discovered, providing closure for some families while opening new questions about the full scope of activities that might never be completely understood. The Catholic Church's institutional reforms initiated after the Pemberton scandal established precedents for transparency and accountability that influenced the organization's responses to subsequent abuse crises throughout the 20th and 21st centuries. The case demonstrated that religious authority could not shield criminal behavior from secular justice and that institutional reputation was less important than protecting vulnerable individuals from systematic exploitation. International investigations inspired by the Pemberton network continued producing results decades after the original trials concluded. Dr. Heinrich Brenner was finally arrested in 1979 and extradited to face trial in Germany, where evidence revealed his participation in similar networks throughout South America. His conviction provided additional closure for families while demonstrating that patient investigation could eventually reach even those who believed themselves beyond justice. The financial networks dismantled during the Pemberton investigation provided templates for combating modern human trafficking and international organized crime. Banking regulations implemented in response to the case established monitoring systems that detected suspicious transactions and required verification of fund sources for large international transfers. These measures influenced anti-money laundering legislation that remains fundamental to international financial oversight today. Academic research examining the psychological and sociological aspects of the Pemberton case contributed to understanding how institutional corruption develops and persists even within organizations dedicated to moral education and child welfare. Studies of the case influenced training programs for teachers, social workers, law enforcement officers, and religious personnel, helping these professionals recognize warning signs and respond appropriately to suspected abuse. The legal precedents established during the prosecution influenced American criminal law regarding conspiracy charges, institutional liability, and international cooperation in complex criminal cases. Law enforcement agencies developed specialized units focused on institutional abuse and international trafficking, using investigative techniques and coordination methods pioneered during the Pemberton investigation. What did you think of this chilling investigation into one of America's most disturbing institutional crime families? The Pemberton case changed how we understand the potential for evil within respected organizations and the importance of never allowing authority to operate without oversight. Share your thoughts in the comments below about how cases like this should influence our approach to protecting children today. If you found this deep dive into buried history compelling, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell because we're committed to uncovering the stories that powerful people hoped would remain hidden forever. The Clearfield County community struggled for decades to reconcile their memories of the respected Pemberton family with the overwhelming evidence of their crimes. Many residents who had trusted these religious figures with their children experienced profound guilt and trauma that influenced family relationships and community dynamics for generations. Support groups formed to help survivors and affected families process their experiences while working to prevent similar tragedies. Modern investigators continue studying the Pemberton case as new forensic techniques and international cooperation methods reveal additional information about the network's activities. Cold case units periodically review evidence from the investigation, using updated technology to identify additional victims and pursue prosecution of aging collaborators who escaped justice during the original trials. The lessons learned from the Pemberton network remain relevant today as society continues confronting institutional abuse and the challenge of balancing respect for religious authority with the necessity of protecting vulnerable individuals. The case serves as a permanent reminder that evil can flourish within any organization when oversight mechanisms fail, and that the courage of survivors like Robert Chen remains essential for exposing systematic crimes and achieving justice for victims. The legacy of Timothy Walsh, Michael Kowalski, David Morrison, and their fellow victims lives on through the institutional reforms, legal precedents, and protective measures that emerged from their tragic deaths. Their suffering was not meaningless if it prevents future children from experiencing similar horrors and ensures that those who claim moral authority are held accountable to the highest standards of conduct and transparency in their service to vulnerable populations.